Hello, it's Alex Cardenas, and this is my lesson 11 video reflection. So, the first prompt: why do relationship conflicts potentially lead to the most dysfunctional and harmful outcomes? So, relationship conflicts tend to lead to dysfunctional and harmful outcomes because they could target people and not the problems itself. They can decrease trust and respect with that person. They can damage the communication with that person or with yourself. Um, so what I mean by like targeting the problem rather than, or targeting the person rather than the problem, is that there could be tension when there's a lack of communication. So when there's a conflict between a loved one or a friend, it can, the difference in personalities can cause a lot more tension because they perceive things differently. So if there's not a discussion and it's more of a targeted attack in a way, when you're trying to talk about the problem at hand, it can seem like you're targeting the person rather than communicating the problem. So the problem could be like if I got into a fight with my boyfriend, I could say that it was about video games, but I could say that he spends too much time doing this and not this. That's not really targeting the problem. That's targeting him for not perfecting his time management in a way. And that can cause a lot of hostility, and he could actually form resentment towards me, which is the worst possible outcome, especially when you're trying to just communicate your dislike for something. It can decrease respect because I could communicate my feelings about it, but I could make it so that he feels like I don't respect him enough to properly communicate, or I don't trust his decisions, or I don't trust him in general to make a change. So that can lead to damaging communication between us because it'll feel like I'd always resort to targeting him rather than that issue at hand. Um, if another issue comes up in the future, it can actually worsen the argument because there's resentment and there's hostility from the past one. I can become more defensive when he's saying something that he doesn't like that I do, or he could become defensive when I say something that he does that I don't like. And then it just circles back to, well, I don't know why you feel like that. I didn't do that, or you're taking it out of proportion. And now there's tension, there's resentment, we're not communicating properly, we're not listening to each other. And that can cause harmful outcomes because sometimes it'll lead to a breakup or it'll lead to no contact, which is harmful for the person because they don't think they did anything wrong. The other party doesn't feel they did anything wrong. And then there's never that proper closure or the proper communication of I didn't communicate my feelings, he doesn't care, and vice versa. So, relationship conflicts can be dysfunctional just because you don't want to hurt them, but you want to communicate your feelings, but they don't balance out if it's not done properly. So it can it could harm them and it could harm yourself because you feel like you don't know how to communicate, and then you're stuck with, well, I could have done this better, but there's no way to resolve that if you don't communicate it. The second prompt is, of the 5 conflict management strategies, which do you believe are most likely to occur in conflict between two unequal parties? So, conflicts between unequal parties could be a manager and employee, board of directors and the CEO, large company, small supplier, any of those. So, if it, to keep it easy, if it's a manager versus an employee, that's an unequal party because there's a superior and then there's below them, I guess, in the nicest way possible. There's a power imbalance. So the manager has authority over you. But then if the manager is on a power trip or the employee feels they're on a power trip, there's a sense of being in control or being controlled. So the manager has control over the outcome, and then the employee will just feel like they have to comply because they're in power or in control. They can make decisions and the employee will feel they had no part or they had no say. And then it causes tension, like the relationship conflict, because it feels like they're not being appreciated or they're not being listened to. So the stronger side, like the manager or an authority figure, they have leverage over the superior party or the employees or anything like that. And it just, it doesn't communicate properly enough. So they can, sorry, I'm reading the rest of the question. What do you, okay. Okay, so yeah, with the manager and the employee, it's honestly just competition in a way because you're trying to voice your opinion as an employee, but the manager won't listen because they're in charge or they have more power over you. So the manager doesn't feel they have to listen to you, but the employee feels they have to listen to them. On the other hand, the question is, which do you believe is most likely to occur in a conflict between two equal parties? So, two employees. So, for that one, there's more collaboration. They know how to communicate with each other. No one is in control. They both listen and then they both work together. It's harder to work with a manager because they're constantly telling you what to do and you feel like you have to follow every single rule that they're telling you, even if it slows the job down or makes it efficient. But with two employees, it's easier to properly communicate your feelings like, hey, I feel we should do this. This is why. I agree with that. Let's try that. You're more willing to collaborate and compromise with each other because there's no one that has an upper edge or an authority like towards you. So they can find a middle ground easier than a manager and employee. The third prompt is, consider a time that you managed conflict through avoidance. What did you actually avoid by putting off and waiting to deal with the conflict? There's been a couple of times where I, when I was a manager, I chose to avoid a problem. Or when I was listening to a manager and we got into a little spat, I guess you could say, I chose to avoid it. Because it's easier to deal with it that way. It's easier to find a way. So sorry, I'm reorganizing my screen. But it's easier to just let the problem die down. Um, it darkened my screen a lot. I don't like that. Sorry. So, even in relationships, when there's an argument, sometimes you avoid it at the beginning just because it's a little easier to gather your thoughts when you both have a minute apart. I prefer avoidance in certain situations just because I have a lot of emotions and I say things I don't mean in certain situations if I have too many emotions or I don't know how to regulate them. So I got into a fight with my friend one time. I don't even remember what it was about. It was something so small. But we got into a fight and I chose this. I don't recommend doing this. This is one of those situations where it made it worse. I chose to not speak to her because I didn't know how to properly communicate my feelings. And I wanted to sit with how I was feeling and try and figure out a way to communicate it. She didn't see it that way, and sometimes you need to communicate that you're trying to avoid it in that way so you can circle back when you're level headed and you're not gonna feel like you're gonna explode or anything. Um, certain conflicts are best addressed with avoidance, like arguments, because you can take the time to figure out how you're feeling, how you want to communicate. But the other issue would be if, how do I word it? If you're in something with a manager and you choose to avoid it, that can show insubordination or a lack of wanting to do your work. So, avoidance in the workplace is not recommended because you have to listen to what your manager's saying and you have to just get the work done. You can pull them to the side and say, I don't like how you address this, or I don't like how you communicated this to me. This is how I felt. That's when you shouldn't use avoidance. That's when you should. It's it's so hard to say, but it's good to use avoidance when you're trying to control how you're feeling and how you want to communicate properly without it feeling like you're blowing up or you're taking it out of proportion. But you should always communicate that in the beginning. So, with my friend, it made it worse. After I communicated it with her, we were both at an understanding like, I did the same thing. I just wish you said that. It's like, okay, got it. I will work on that. I'll do it next time. But you should never use the avoidance tactic when you're in the workplace just because it can lead to a lot more problems than the original issue at hand. I'm sorry, I know that was everywhere, but that I was trying to figure out a way to make it I don't know. Okay, so the last prompt. Discuss the integrative bargaining strategies used in the case negotiation discussed in the previous section. The one that I saw was the Uber case scenario. I'm assuming it's that one because it's the same chapter. So, which of the four strategies were used? I saw that it was focusing on interest, not positions, and also separating people from the problem. So, they, which one did I say? Focus on interest, not positions. That one first. So, they, Uber is known for their quick service, their ability to go for what the customer wants. So they're driving or they're picking up an order. So in the case scenario, says what the management of Uber failed to realize is that the different perceptions of their employees is one of their most valuable assets. So when you focus on the interest of the people and not the positions that are being taken within the company, that can cause some issues because there's a lot of butting heads and there's a lot of stubbornness. This person can say, I want to strictly focus on this. I don't care what else is going on. This is the issue at hand. This person can say, well, I feel different because I see it this way. And that can cause issues because you're not listening to everybody. You're focusing on the main interest at hand, I guess, to tie in like the strategy. So they're not listening. So they're focusing on the interest of the company, not the positions of the people that and what they're taking. So in the case scenario, it says verbal abuse towards subordinate not only is another example of the presence of faulty downward communication at Uber. Downward communication that is faulty in that way, you're not you you're showing that you're not really listening, or you don't want to properly communicate the task, the issue, the the need for progress in a way. The other one that I did notice is separating people from the problem. So that kind of ties into they're not listening to their staff. They're not listening to the different opinions, the different views, the different perceptions. They're only choosing to focus on the one thing that they really care about. So they're not properly communicating with anybody. They're not informing them of any decisions, of the issue at hand. I know I'm repeating myself, but there's a competitive culture, so they have to communicate all together, whether it's informal or formal. They all have to talk, they all have to communicate, they all have to be on the same page so that Uber can succeed as a whole and not as one part of a whole. Um, corrupt culture. Um, yeah. So that's them separating the people from the actual problem. And I think Uber still has a lot to work on, in my opinion. But I think they need to start taking into account, sorry, the different views of everybody. And I'm assuming they've gotten better at it because the case was from 9 years ago. But I think everybody can do a little better at communicating. But yeah, thank you for listening to my video reflection and have a great